changing the nature of nature, changing the nature of the world that gives us everything we care about. And we've been doing it innocently, not really conscious of what it matters until right about now, because we can see the evidence. We're not making this up. Here's the evidence, the view from high in the sky over years, a few decades, to be able, at the same time that we're losing more, we're learning more. And that's the great good news. And zoos, aquariums, education, learning centers, places where people who cannot access the deep sea, cannot go to the Arctic perhaps, can at least touch and feel and become acquainted with some of the creatures who are so much at risk. But then when you think about it, we are too. What we're doing to nature, what we do to wildlife, land and sea, we're doing to ourselves. And, you know, I don't have to go through all this. You know yourself, you see the headlines. The world is truly changing at a geologic pace, and we can look in the mirror to see why. We are the vectors of change, putting CO2 into the atmosphere that comes back to the ocean, warming the whole planet, but certainly warming the sea, and causing acidification that is causing unprecedented die-offs of coral reefs. About half since when I began diving in the 1950s have already succumbed to the many forces that we are imposing on the ocean. I visited a place just a couple of years ago, the Coral Sea, that I first visited in the 1970s when, instead of seeing this rather dreary seascape, whatever landscape underwater, it was thriving with life. Jane Goodall says the same thing about the forests and the wildlife that she knew in Africa. Change, sweeping the planet, mostly not great, mostly cause for concern. But at the same time, cause for hope, because now we know why the ocean matters, we know why forests matter, we know why the fabric of life shares this little speck in the universe, why it all matters. We didn't have that kind of perspective when I was a kid. We thought the ocean was too big to fail. And we still have a tendency to believe that the planet is too big to fail, no matter what insults we address or put into the atmosphere, or how many birds or animals or wild creatures in the ocean we consume. There will always be an Earth, right? Well, maybe, whatever always means, but a place that's suitable for us? If it's not a place that can host elephants and chimpanzees and polar bears and redwood trees in hardwood forests along the eastern seaboard or coral reefs in the ocean, it's not a place that is going to be appropriate for humans either, because, as all of you know, we're all in this together. We now understand and appreciate what we could not know when I was a kid, that more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere comes from aquatic photosynthesizers, mangrove trees, seagrass meadows, the green stuff in the ocean that pumps out oxygen in the process of capturing carbon dioxide and generating food. We didn't even know about the existence of a creature that contributes 20% of the oxygen to the atmosphere, Prochlorococcus. I try to get kids to pronounce it and write songs about Prochlorococcus because, 1 in every 5 breaths you take comes from these little guys that are widely spread throughout the ocean, but we did not know of their existence until 1986. What were you doing? Some of you were around then, some of you weren't born then, but it wasn't that long ago, geologically speaking. Our learning curve is like this, coincident with the destruction curve that is going, well, also like this, unfortunately, but the health of the planet is certainly declining. Our job, no matter who you are, a mom, a dad, a CEO, the aquarium director, a kid who goes to the aquarium, whatever it is, put at the top of your everyday list of things to do, whatever it takes to make the planet safe for the future. It transcends everything else. If we fail to take care of the natural world, where are we going to go? Mars? Go see the Martian, and think again. We take so very much for granted. But now we know. We know about the generation of oxygen out there in the ocean, starting mostly with those little guys, the little green guys, blue-green guys, red, brown, whatever it is, the seaweeds and the plankton, the photosynthesizers, generating food and generating oxygen that power the little creatures that in turn power the bigger creatures that in turn are consumed by the somewhat larger creatures. And there's no experience in the world like jumping the middle of one of these food chains in action, as long as you remember not to be a part of the food chain yourself, but to observe it and feel it and understand it, that this is how the chemistry of the planet is shaped. In the ocean, the food chains, on the land, birds that used to, darken the skies, and along the way they darkened the earth with their droppings and fertilized vast areas that now do not have that source of nitrates and phosphates. Every creature, of course, uses the natural world, and we are no exception. Earthworms do it, eagles do it, fish do it. We alter the nature of nature in the process of our existence. But what really matters now is understanding what the limits are if we are to prosper on a world that requires making peace with nature. We have not done a good job of it for the ocean, and have to say that's similar in terms of the history of humankind on the land. 10,000 years. Ed Wilson, one of my beloved mentors at Harvard, the Ant-Man, says, over 10,000 years, we consumed the large, the slow, and the tasty across North America, well, around the world. That's on the land. But in something less than 100 years, we've done a comparable thing to the ocean. But it's not just large, or the slow, or the tasty organisms that we have taken from the sea. It's comprehensive exploitation of the ocean. We know how to kill. The question is, can we do a better job of caring and understanding our relationship to nature? And how do we convey that to 7 billion people most effectively, knowing that not all of them, or even a significant fraction of them, cannot personally either get up high in the sky as an astronaut or go down deep in the ocean or even touch the ocean. They need to know, everyone, every child, every person needs to understand that the ocean touches you with every breath you take, every drop of water you drink. The ocean matters to you if you've never seen it. The wilderness, the fabric of life, you may never witness a rhinoceros in the wild. You may never see a musk oxen or whatever it is that, you see pictures, but if you know they matter, then you could be motivated to take those everyday decisions armed with knowledge that will make all the difference in the world. We used to kill whales primarily for oil and for pounds of meat, right up into the 1980s. 86 was the year. Not only was Prochlorococcus discovered, but nations around the world decided to have a halt to commercial whaling. Well, some countries still take whales commercially, but the fact is there's been a transformation in the way people think, partly because of zoos and aquariums, different way of thinking about our fellow mammals, about our fellow animals, about life on Earth. We just need to shape up with respect to dealing with the big questions now that are upon us about the ethical considerations. What kinds of animals can tell the stories? And what kinds of information can we most effectively convey to address those big questions about how do we take care of the planet that takes care of us, the planet that is in trouble? Now we know that whales alive are worth a lot more than whales dead. Can we apply that same thinking to tuna? Can we think that maybe a live tuna fish swimming in the ocean, at the top of a food chain, carbon capture, carbon storage, blue carbon, if you will, swimming around in the ocean, transporting nutrients widely, part of what maintains a life, a planet that works in our favor. Do we have to give in to the old ways of thinking about wildlife, whether it's on the land or the sea, as primarily furs or feathers or meat? Can't we realize to treat the rest of the living world with dignity and respect? And of course, all creatures have a way of using the natural world, and many creatures, like humans, we eat our neighbors. We eat the birds, we eat the mammals, we eat the fish. But there are limits that we now know that we could not know. With 7 billion people, we have 7 billion minds to touch and realize that, look, let's look at fish differently. We came to think about birds differently. We have bird watchers. We have, of course, Kentucky fried bird. We have, Thanksgiving turkey birds. But when you think about fish, you get a fish sandwich, you get fish chowder, you get fish and chips. There are 25,000 or so different kinds of fish. What kind of fish are you talking about? You don't get a mammal burger. Well, maybe you do, but or Kentucky fried bird. We need to understand who's who out there. What bite are we taking out of the ocean? And to realize that just as we've come to value elephants and elephant societies and elephant feelings, if you will, emotions, there are counterparts in the ocean, and they're not all mammals. If they could just talk to us, I mean, most fish do make sounds, but we're not listening. We ought to tune into them. And actually, my children, I have 3 children. I now have 4 grandsons. That's how you get them, by having children. And they're all hooked on aquaria, of course. And my children all volunteered at the Steinhardt Aquarium in San Francisco. And my daughter, Elizabeth, really just learned so much about the individual nature of fish, and they learned something about my daughter as somebody who was different from those guys they didn't like particularly. And she was a favored, somebody who came and fed them and scrubbed the tanks and all that. Not everybody got the same kind of treatment that she did. Well, I mean, this is a whole other topic that we need to think about. What do fish feel? What do they do? What are their social structures? There are ways that now that we become more acquainted with them, more sensitive to them, what is their value beyond beauty or pounds of meat or squeezed for oil or churned into cat food and dog food and chicken food and pig food and things like that? Respect for life in the ocean, from the big guys, the biggest fish in the sea, like the big whale shark, to the little ones that now are maybe owing their future prosperity, maybe even their existence, to people who care and have learned about their life history and are cultivating seahorses, restoring them in some cases to places where they have been greatly depleted, and maybe providing farmed alternatives to wild-caught ones, but basically knowing why they matter, from the biggest ones to some of the littlest ones. We have an unprecedented opportunity, as never before, to actually communicate on a scale that is absolutely vital, not just to the future of the ocean and the creatures who live there, but to our future, knowing how everything relates to everything else. The little flower on the wall that Tennyson spoke of. If I could know you all in all, I would know what God and man, I think he said is, but that doesn't sound grammatically right. Are, maybe. Anyway, we are connected to every coral reef, and every coral reef is connected to us. And knowing what we now know, with the authority that humans now have over the world as a whole, we've carved out exclusive economic zones out into the ocean, starting again in the 1980s, in a critical point in history. So that This country is twice as big as what most maps show. Australia, likewise. The blue part is more than twice as big as the land that we think of as Australia. Little island countries may be 10 or 20, 30 times bigger. We have an opportunity to weigh in with this authority to take action over parts of the planet that heretofore have not been open to us for care. Just exploit in the past, but today, just as going back 100 years ago, this year, 2016, is the anniversary, centennial of national parks, we have the opportunity to go out into the ocean and establish blue parks, armed with the same ethic that inspired the protection of our cultural and natural and historic heritage on land, to do it in the ocean. And President George W. Bush, President Obama, and essentially every president before had some hand in shaping care on the land, as well as now recent presidents using their authority, working with the people, working with governments, to do something really grand in the ocean. Think about it. If you could go back 100 years, armed with what we now know, what would we do differently on the land with wildlife? And how now can the voice that zoos and aquariums have be applied to point out that we have to take care of the natural world by bringing people who otherwise would only have some vague idea of what these creatures look like or what it looks like to be looked back upon by them, that this is, as never before, a moment in time. The National Geographic areas are being identified called pristine seas. We need to do it on the land globally. We need to do it in the ocean globally. We need to do it in our backyard, not only to take places that are still in pretty good shape, but to look at places that have been depleted and restore them, hope spots. And I have to say that right here in this audience, in this room, but also out there, whoever you are beyond, every one of you should appoint yourself as a hope spot, because you are. Every aquarium, every zoo, every place of learning. This is the big aquarium. This is the zoo that is our home. You know, we can't get away. We're imprisoned here. We've got to get it right. And we can. You can look at the statistics and go off and want to jump off a cliff. Or you can say, now we know. As never before, we recognize we've got a problem. Let's put it to work. Let's get the kids out there. Let's bring the kids in to get acquainted with the natural world. And remember that the most important thing that we take from nature is our existence. Thank you.